But you know what, President Nelson? Our goals are really the same here. Back to the liability, and I'm going to make another point. The church has to be concerned about liability. All institutions do. But that concern should be heavily loaded on the front end, prevention of abuse. Put your liability concern there. What can we do to prevent a child from being abused? What can we do? One example you're not doing is background checks. Why haven't they done that? The state of California is making you do that. Why are you being forced to do everything you can to keep children safe? This is not good optics for the church. You are damaging the church that you lead because you're simply you're asleep at the wheel. You're a lazy learner on this. You can do better, but make the church safe. But something, the goals, this might sound crazy to you, but our goals really are the same here. President Nelson, our goals are to reduce the drug usage amongst kids. Did you know that? I want kids to reduce drugs. I support the Word of Wisdom effort. We don't want kids doing drugs, and we want them to be safe, right? But did you know, this is a fact, that an abused child is way more likely to use drugs than a child that has not been abused. So when you protect and prevent abuse, you're also working on the Word of Wisdom. Did you know that, President Nelson? It's directly related to the Word of Wisdom. In my mind, and I actually during those 2 years of meetings, I said, I want one thing to happen. I want you to make abuse just as serious as the Word of Wisdom and the law of chastity. I wanted you to put a third leg on what is serious in this church and to make the addressing of abuse just as serious. Abuse is not to happen. But obviously it fell on attorney's ears, not your ears. You weren't there to hear it. So, but anyways, did you know that an abused child is more likely to break the law of chastity? Abused children. Did you know that, President Nelson? It's a truth. So really, our efforts here are not just about abuse, but it's about helping children to live the law of chastity. Because if they're not being abused, they're more likely to keep the law of chastity. Just a fact. Did you know that abused children are more likely to drop out of school? Did you know that? It's a fact. It's huge numbers of children that are abused. A big reason why they drop out of high school is because they were abused. They were trying to keep themselves safe. And for you to not, and now obviously that research was done about schools, but for you not to imagine that also relates to the church as well. I myself know a bunch of children that are leaving the church because they are afraid of abuse and they're being abused. This goes way beyond my family. Children are leaving the church. They're leaving the message of Christ because you are not protecting them from abuse. We're on the same page here. If you were to protect children, you would have fewer kids leaving the church. You would have fewer mothers heartbroken because they're going to lose their child forever in the eternities. But you know that abuse, we got somebody driving by us here. You got one. But you know, President Nelson, we're trying to get you up to speed and get you out of the lazy learner status. We want to get you into a well-informed prophets here and revelator, where you can pray and you can hear God's voice. You got to do more than just pray. You got to work it out in your mind, and we're helping you to do that. Did you know that when a person is abused, that their mental health is damaged long beyond the point of the abuse? Did you know that, President Nelson? So you have a person that you think the abuse ends and everything's good to go, right? It's not true. They've done countless studies showing that the abuse lasts well into a person's adult life after the abuse occurred. And with damaged mental health comes all kinds of problems that you were trying to keep people from using drugs and other problems. But you also know that children who are abused are far more likely to go to prison, both the victim and the perpetrator. Did you know that? Both the victim and the perpetrator. That's not saving grace, President Nelson. But if we were to prevent that abuse, we were to get creative and invite God into this conversation and put another couple seats at the table instead of just the attorneys, we could adopt something and be creative and let God inspire us to protect these kids and protect the liabilities on the front end, not after it's already occurred. President Nelson, getting you up to speed here, so you're not a lazy learner. Did you know that abused children are far more likely to think about suicide and to attempt suicide? Did you know that? The studies are proving it. Way, way more likely. It's a serious contributor to suicide ideation and suicide attempts is abuse. You know, you told us for a very long time that, suicide was, next to murder, and murder, you lose everything. And you changed policy on that. It was about the time my son died, actually, where you guide the church, probably President Monson, wisely came out, approved that, look, some things we know and some things we don't know. That was wise, President Nelson. You made a policy. The church made a policy. The prophet, seer, and revelator at the time made a policy change. There's some things we know and some things we don't know. And we don't know. You can do that with abuse as well. Did you also know that one of the major the heaviest contributor to abuse, to suicide, is abuse? Serious matter, very serious contributor. It was the number one contributor to my son's end-of-life decision is abuse. President Nelson, children are killing themselves. Utah has a very serious abuse prevention, teen suicide problem. Very serious. And you guys, you keep talking about the high altitude of Utah, but you're not looking further than that. We had Governor Herbert. He had a task force on to explore ways to prevent abuse prevention, teen suicide. And I contacted Governor Herbert multiple times, and I would have drove all the way from Vegas up here for free and put in all my time for free just to be able to participate in that task force. And me, of all people, I've lost a son to suicide. I laid in bed for years pondering, why did he make this decision? It took me a long time to fully understand that. I could have brought a wealth of great suffering, actually, knowledge that I obtained in unbelievable suffering to that conversation. They didn't invite me there, but they had Elder Rasband on that board. Did you know that some of the other people, they left and discussed, because we know who controls the legislature in the governor's house here in Utah. We know who controls that. It's you. 80 to 90% of LDS, the Utah legislation is LDS. But they didn't want somebody like me getting there and maybe saying some uncomfortable things, like your abuse prevention policy is ineffective. It's negligent. It's leading to great harm, and it's attorney written. It's scribe written.